Okay, ready?
Ready.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. One of the biggest issues in a divorce is the division of property. Now, when I was getting divorced, I had no idea what that meant. What's property? What's a non-marital asset? What's an asset that is marital? And so that's what I want to talk about today, because if you're thinking about getting divorced or you're new to this, it probably seems really confusing and overwhelming and complex, and it is, but it isn't. So today I have a great guest to talk about what marital assets are, what non-marital assets are. And honestly, before we started recording, we were talking about it, and I thought I knew so much about divorce, and I really didn't know this. So I'm really excited to share it. So my guest is Liz Felt Wakeman, who is a divorce attorney and the founder of Wakeman Law Group. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Jackie.
Nice to have you on the show, as always.
Thanks for having me, and it's great to see you.
So, Liz is a divorce attorney in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, but handles anywhere in Chicago or Chicagoland or Illinois for that matter, right?
For the most part, correct.
Okay. And Liz has been a divorce attorney for 14 years. She's been an attorney for 31 years, but specializing in divorce for 14. So, Liz, before we started recording, we were kind of going over what we were going to talk about. And I asked you, what's the difference between a premarital asset and a non-marital asset?
Right. And I noted that a premarital asset is something that you have before marriage. A premarital is a non-marital asset, which means
Always?
um, unless you've contributed income that you earned during the marriage to that premarital asset. So an example is if you have a 401k from a former employer and you're not employed by them anymore, so you're not contributing to that 401k, that 401k is non-marital, premarital, and not subject to being divided in the divorce. But if you have a 401k with $200,000 in it at the time of the marriage, and then you continue to contribute to that 401k during the marriage, it's considered most likely to have been transmuted or transformed into a marital asset.
So if it goes from 200 to 400, you don't have to have the 200 additional is not the marital asset. The whole 400 becomes marital.
The
Just
whole
because you touched it, even if you put $10 in it, it's not. See, this is really important for people to think about.
Right. So if you put $10 into it, you'd probably be able to argue that equitably it should not be considered marital.
Okay.
Otherwise, but if you've been contributing over the course of your employment and over the course of years, the only way you're going to be able to separate that initial $200,000 is if you have a forensic accountant testify to all the gains and losses. You will have to have all of the statements from all the quarterly statements from that retirement plan in order to effectively and accurately reach the conclusion of what's non-marital and what's marital.
So is the takeaway advice, don't touch it?
The takeaway advice is if you have a 401k and you're continuing with that employer, you should keep every statement that you have. Just put it in a file or store it on your computer and keep every statement as they come in.
Just keep records.
Yes.
All right, let's get into this. And you were telling me before the show that, oftentimes people get separated, and before they even pursue anything legally, they say, okay, let's just split it up. You take this 50-50. That's what it is anyway. Tell my listeners why that's a bad idea.
Because according to the statute and the law in Illinois, the valuation date for dividing assets is the date of the judgment of dissolution of marriage. And that could occur 1 year, 3 years, in the worst case, 5 years down the road. So one of you could have taken your assets and spent them all, and one of you could have taken yours and invested and saved and accumulated a nest egg. Well, that spouse is very surprised to find that on the date of the judgment of dissolution of marriage, they have to part with what's gained and what they've had grown from their half.
Okay, that would be so immensely infuriating to me. So I want to tell my listeners how important this is. If you get separated and it's not legal and you and your ex just say, here, we have $200,000. You take 100,000, I'll take 100,000, and then we'll file and we'll be divorced. And a year goes by and your ex spends the 100 or gambles it away or whatever, and your 100 is invested and becomes 120, you have to split the 120 with your ex. Wow.
Right. And so,
Very good piece of advice.
and
Do
then
nothing.
the best advice on that is if you do divide your assets and think that this is the end of the story, get your divorce done quickly. Do not mess around. Do not play games and litigate every point. Just get it done so you can keep what you have if you're the party that is the wise financial person.
Excellent advice. So if you split it up, make sure you get the divorce finalized, signed, sealed, delivered in the next 60 to 90 days max.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk about specifically, let's start with marital assets. What are some marital assets? Meaning, now, Liz, explain to my listeners first what happens in a divorce. Marital assets get split, non-marital assets go back to the person. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what are some marital assets that you're going to have to split?
It's anything that's been acquired while you were married. So that is often a house, cars, summer homes, vacation points, award points from frequent flyers or hotels, collectibles, like Yadros or antiques or whatever somebody coins, whatever someone might collect, cryptocurrency, anything that's acquired during the marriage is marital.
All right. Now you're telling me, because I just was shocked when I heard points. I got divorced to somebody who was a United 1K member. You're telling me I could have gotten half of his miles? Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Well, that sucks for me because I did not. So that's really important. So you're also saying, I just want to bring up some examples so listeners can think about this. So let's say you got married 5 years ago and you turned in your car and bought a new car. Is that car marital if you're getting divorced now, but you bought it when you were married?
If you are putting any of your marital income into that car, yes.
Okay, but if you spend it out of your own separate non-marital account, it does not count.
Probably, except then there's the argument that maintaining the car is going to be paid for from marital income.
Mhm.
So your expenses for insurance and repairs and car washes and use for that car, it would make that a gray area.
All right, now Liz, don't you feel like in most divorces, it's like you keep your car, I'll keep mine, and that's it?
Yes,
Except what if one person has a much nicer car? Then you could get into that argument too.
or one person has more debt on their car.
Right. Okay. Next thing I wanted to ask you about was the house. So let's say you owned a home and your spouse moved in with you during the marriage. Is that home now a marital asset?
Probably yes. There are some exceptions. And again, keeping track, like maybe having it appraised before you get married, keeping track of where all the money came from to pay, again, insurance and maintenance and repairs for the home, property taxes for the home. But in most cases, the marital home where the family lives as where the couple lives as a married couple is going to be considered to be a gift to the marriage or a marital property. And that can
Well,
be hardship if someone owns a home before the marriage and thinks it's theirs.
you're listening to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. And today I'm talking to divorce attorney Liz Felt Wakeman, founder of Wakeman Law Group out of,
Crystal Lake.
okay, I was going to say Palatine for
I live
some.
in Inverness, so
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Founder of Wakeman Law Group based out of Crystal Lake, Illinois. And Liz, serves clients all over the state, depending on how far or how close, but definitely most of the state of Illinois. And Liz and I are talking about what is a marital asset and what is a non-marital asset, and giving some tips if you're getting divorced and you're new to this. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about these marital and non-marital assets. And we're going to give you some tips to make sure you get the divorce outcome that you feel is fair and to make decisions that could affect the outcome. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff and I'm your host. What are marital assets and what are non-marital assets in a divorce? When I was getting divorced, I had no clue. That's what we're talking about today. My guest is divorce attorney Liz Felt-Wakeman. Liz has been a divorce attorney for 14 years. She's been an attorney for 31 years, but specializing in divorce for 14. So, Liz, I wanted to talk about inheritance for a minute. So, let's say you're married and somebody dies in your family and gives you an inheritance. Is that marital or non-marital?
That's non-marital, and but most people treat inheritance funds or assets incorrectly, and they transmute it or transform it into marital property. If you
Does
put it into,
transmute mean that you contribute to it?
yes.
Hmm.
So if you've put it in both of your names, or you get an inheritance of $50,000 and you finish your basement, you don't get that $50,000 back when you go to sell the house or when you get a divorce. You're giving it as a gift to the marriage, and you don't recover it.
All right, now this is important because what happens if somebody gets, let's say, $100,000 from a grandmother? You're married, you take the 100 that you're rewarded, you put it into your marital bank account. Is that a mistake?
Huge mistake. You're giving that money to both of you. You need
And
to keep it
if
in a separate account, completely separate. You need to pay
open up a
taxes
new
on,
account.
right, and
Mhm.
pay any taxes on gains or losses from a separate account. Keep it entirely separate.
Now, I don't want to be, the person who's like a downer that doesn't think you should trust somebody when you're in a happy marriage. But I think there are a lot of people listening to this that think like, wow, I'm thinking of getting divorced and I had this money and I already put it into our account. Is it possible after you get it to take it out and open up an account?
No, you can't undo it once you've given it. And this is an interesting thing because this can, going either direction can cause friction in a marriage. But I find that there's less friction caused when the person who inherits the account keeps it entirely separate, does not have the other person having any access to it, because then it's clear and it's not up for debate. What becomes more complicated and causes a breakdown of marriages is when you've mixed it and then the person who had the money said, well, I gave you this money, so I should get something for it, and or I'm entitled or what, and then it causes the breakdown of marriages. I find that it's healthier for the marriage if it's kept separate. So there's no question about it.
Well, I would love to tell a story about somebody I know, and I'm telling it so the listeners can beware. So, somebody I know, one of her parents, her father, passed away and gave her like $50,000. She put it into the marital account. The husband spent it on like an investment or something. The investment went bad. Now the 50's gone. Now a few years later, her mother passes away and leaves her like 2 or 300,000. So she was smart enough, I hope, I didn't ask, to put that in a separate account, right? I mean, this is what I'm talking about. But I'm sure that any discussion of that causes so much conflict in a marriage that's already could be suffering. Because if you were blissful, you might not even think twice about it.
That's right. But I think even people who are blissful do think and should think twice about it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. It's nothing personal against your spouse. It's just protecting yourself and also your children. Maybe you want to pass that along to your children. Maybe you want to use it for college. Maybe you want to give it to them for anything, in your will or whatever.
Right, and very often it's the intent of the person who left the inheritance for it to be used for the next generation. I find that's a common intent. And it's probably not the intent that their spouse, that their daughter or son's spouse goes and buys a new car. But there's an important point about this I need to make, and that's, I always say it doesn't matter whose name an account is in. And that's important because it really doesn't, except for the case of an inheritance. But people will often say, well, we've always kept our money separate and we have my account and his account. It really is still all ours if you're contributing your income to it, with the
Now,
exception of the
now it
inheritance
might
account.
be easier, less complicated to figure out what 50/50 is if it's in your own names and not merged. But you're right, there's really no difference.
Right.
Okay, what about income? So let's say you started a business and the business is in your name, you're using an account, and now you're getting divorced 10 years later and your business is worth, let's say, they value it at, $100,000. Split,
So
completely split if you started the business during the marriage. What if you started the business before you got married?
there are so many factors to consider with that, that is not something that I could answer in this short of a time, because it's
Mhm.
going to depend upon what money did you use to start the business. It's also going to depend upon whether you are like a sole business owner, so you have goodwill, so that if you're gone, there's no business left. That's going to require expert analysis to determine that.
Mhm. Now, Liz, do you ever bring in financial experts to help you with this kind of stuff? Who are they?
Yes, forensic accountants in particular, I bring them in to look at all those things that I just discussed. And there are certain specialized business evaluators that their job is to determine the value of a business, and they know how to address the issues of goodwill. For example, if the business is that so closely tied to that individual person that the business wouldn't go on if that person weren't there to do it.
Right, right. There's so much that goes into it. Maybe somebody doesn't even want to work for the business anymore. Maybe they want out or maybe they want something else in exchange for the business. But let me ask you this, can any of this stuff be mediated or is that complicated?
Absolutely. All this can be negotiated, whether it's with a mediator or with the attorneys, it's all subject to negotiation.
Okay, in closing, Liz, tell me any other advice you have for people. I feel like you've given so many good tips. What other advice do you have for people when it comes to marital or non-marital assets?
Well, first of all, if you're getting married and you have assets, or you're marrying someone who has assets and or significant debts, talk to an attorney in advance to see if you're a candidate for having a prenuptial agreement, or to know what steps to take to keep your accounts um, in in the way that you intend to keep them, whatever that is. And then when you have a sign of a divorce, or you have a discourse in the marriage that you think is really deeper than just your typical average evening argument, um, talk to an attorney about what you should do before you start dividing things and making agreements.
Okay, but Liz, don't you feel like when people are first getting married, they're so in love and they're so happy that they're not thinking about this? So, what is like the minimal thing that they should do to protect themselves and their non-marital assets?
If they have a 401k with an employer and they're staying with that employer, keep the statements for every quarter. Just scan them, save them, put them in a paper file, whatever you have to do. It's very simple and it's not an indication that you're going to get a divorce. It's just good record keeping. Keep every quarterly statement that comes in.
And is
Or if
that
you get an
because,
inheritance, keep it separate.
okay, and is the reason for it, if you have a 401k and you, let's say, get married and there's 200,000 in the 401k, and then you're not telling my listeners that they should close the 401k and get a new 401k when they're married. You're just saying if you have records, then that 200 is yours.
Many employers and their administrators or their 401k won't let you have two.
I see.
It's,
Like two
it's
with a different name.
right. So
Mhm.
you can check with your employer to see if the 401k administrator will allow that. That would certainly be the cleanest way to go about it. But the point is that if you're getting married, there are things that you can do other than a prenup that can safeguard your assets.
Okay, now most people who are listening to this are not just thinking of getting married for the first time. They might be sitting here thinking, shoot, I'm getting divorced. What can I do now? What do you have to say to people who are like, I can't believe what I'm hearing with Jackie and Liz, and I cannot believe that I'm going to have to give these marital assets half to him when I did all the work and I bought the house and blah, blah, blah. I paid for all his car payments in grad school. What's the What's the message that you tell people who feel this frustration and anger towards what seems so unfair?
I guess be intentional going forward about how assets are titled and what they're, and monitor what's being done with those assets. And keep track of what your spouse is doing as well, as best as you can. You should, in order, for many reasons, it's a good idea to be able to have access to each other's financial information.
Okay, what I want to tell listeners who are frustrated, because I've been in this situation, obviously, that's why I started my business. You're getting divorced. So if you're the one who wants the divorce, my dad always used to say, look, if you have cancer, you're going to pay whatever it takes to get rid of it, right? It's kind of the same idea. You get to be free, you get to be happier. It's okay. All you need when it comes to money is be comfortable, have a roof over your head, have enough. It's okay if you lost some money in the divorce. I know I'm simplifying it, and you might be sitting here thinking, well, that's not your 100,000 that you're giving up. But listen, I get it. I understand your frustration, but at the end of the day, you get away from this person and this toxic situation, and that's the price that you had to pay. Believe me when I tell you I've made more financial mistakes in my life than you can even count. Everybody has. But the good part about it is if you're a capable earner and you're relatively young, this is the first thing, you're going to earn it. You're going to keep earning. If you're older, it's okay. Find a way to live comfortably and happy with what you have because that is your best option. Don't you think, Liz? I mean, like people are free. You don't have to be in this toxicity anymore. It's worth it.
I could not agree more. And you said in a recent podcast with I think it's Colleen from Bierman, that um, you can give up some money to have more time with the kids or vice versa. There are some things you prioritize what's important to you, and then you get the peace of mind going forward that you have some control and you're not subject to someone else's whim.
Absolutely. And just do the best you can and really prioritize what's important to you. If you want the kids, the money won't matter. You got the kids. Now, Liz, I feel like before we sign off here, we should talk about people whose spouse left them and they still have to pay. What do you say to those people? Because that's even harder.
It is, and unfortunately, fault doesn't matter in divorce, so it doesn't matter who made the decision. I hear very often, well, she wanted this, she can pay, and that's just not how it works. It's going to be divided equitably without regard to fault.
And I completely agree with you. And you have to I hate to say this, it is unfair, but you got to suck it up because
Just
you
rip the
don't have
Band-Aid
a
off,
choice. What?
rip the Band-Aid off and get on with it.
And it's okay to grieve it and be pissed and cry and to have a fit of anger about it. And I'm validating you. I would be pissed too. But at some point, you gotta let it go and say, "I was dealt an unfair card, and that's it." But the choice, what is really in your control, is to try to accept at some point, say, "Okay, I'm gonna accept this. I'm not gonna really think about it anymore. I'm gonna take what I get in the divorce, take what is the best possible outcome I can get, and move on with my new life." And Liz, don't you feel like you hear so many people whose spouses left them later say, he did me the biggest favor. I can't even believe how much happier I am."
I hear that all the time. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for all of your great advice. I want to tell my listeners how I truly feel about Liz Wakeman. Extremely capable, extremely experienced, so ethical, does the right thing, stays calm, and really, I would highly recommend somebody work with you, Liz, if they need a divorce attorney.
Thank you, Jackie. It's always nice to see you.
You too. And to my listeners, you can find Liz at wakemanlaw.net. You can also find her in the trusted professionals section of Divorced Girl Smiling, which is divorcedgirlsmiling.com. And while you're there, you can find other wonderful, trusted, vetted divorce professionals, listen to more podcasts, read articles, download my mobile app, or sign up for my free consult. Thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll talk to you real soon.